Scoot towards you just a little bit. There we go. We're going to bend both knees and both hips to about 90 degrees. I'm going to put
sure
the knees
will.
on my head. Okay, call and freak you out. Knees vibrating. Grab the ankles. Drop my body weight back. What's going on with the, see how the low back's laterally flexing there?
Yeah.
If I need to, I can push through at the end.
You're not getting this large range of motion.
Oh, good. I mean, you probably, your ribs and your iliac crest are coming together pretty close, huh? Yeah. We don't have that much room there before we start slamming the ribs against the iliac crest. So you're getting plenty of range of motion there in the low back. We can push through if we want to. Do the other lateral flexion, I'd have to turn the patient over on the other side. The key is put the knees on your knee and use that as a pivot point. The hips have to be flexed 90 degrees. The knees flex 90 degrees. If not, then we're just doing some weird motion in the low back. So hips and knees, 90-90. Bring it up like that, lateral flexion. Go ahead and lie face down. Here's another alternative way to do lateral flexion. Although not commonly used, I will be using this position when I show you strain counter strain for quadratus lumborum. There you go. Let's bring your knees to the side of the table. Like that. Place your knees on my knee here. Palpate SPs. I can grab the knees. Slider into lateral flexion, push through. Bring it back. Slider in lateral flexion, push through. Bring it back. This is pretty easy. I'd prefer seated over this, but this is actually pretty easy. Once the knees are on my knees, I just use the stool to roll, and I push through, and it's actually really easy.
Does it
And
feel
then- What's that?
the same? I feel good. Good.
I don't know. It's definitely a stretch, right? What do you feel like? I mean, your shirt's slidey too. So every time we did that, your body turned this way more too. We'd be perpendicular in the next rep. So we can do it that way. Scoot over. There we go. We can't really do lateral flexion prone like this without using some kind of leverage. You know, we talked about in the thoracic spine, you can push on a TP that way and a TP this way and do that and pretend. That's silly. It's not going to happen on most people unless they're really, really going. You can't actually dig underneath a TP, dig above a TP, and push them in different directions. And we're definitely not even going to try that in the low back because it's just, that's pretending to the point where we're being useless. But we can do extension and flexion prone, and we can actually do rotation. So extension, we can do just like this. We can use that can opener, reinforce it like that. We can use a number of different contacts there for extension. If we need to, I think I have, yeah, there's some blocks right there. I can actually predispose her into extension by putting these blocks right at the trochanter. So that puts her into extension a little bit. And then I can push through and feel extension of the joints. What about flexion?
Flexion prone.
Try and push it.
Yeah.
That seems weird.
Yeah, you can't do it. What we can do is flexion at L5S1. If I push on the sacrum this way, what does that do to the sacrum? What's that motion?
Counter-nutation.
Counter-nutation. And counter-nutation is flexion at L5S1. L5 can do this, or S1 can do that. Both of those are flexion. L5 or S1. So in this particular situation, it's really easy to contact the sacrum, which is basically S1. I can contact the sacral apex, watch where my fingers are going, push like this, and rock the sacrum back. So I can actually flex L5S1 and evaluate that. How'd that feel? Yeah. But, do you have problems describing your feelings? No, you felt distraction back there, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's about what it should feel like. Some people like that. They say, oh, that feels pretty good. A lot of people need flexion at L5S1. So this is something that I want you to evaluate. Don't worry about flexion elsewhere. And I've seen flexion done at L5S1 like this, where you hold the sacrum, and then with this hand you grab the L5 and bring it away. That's make-believe. There's no way. That's total make-believe. Yeah, and that's what I'm doing. I'm giving you a skin wedgie. But this will actually get the joint to move. So it really is. You can, because the sacral angle is like this, you can actually push on the sacrum and make it counter-rotate, counter-nutate on almost everybody. Some people have really flat sacral angles, and if that's the case, if it feels like you're just sliding off their sacrum, then you're probably not going to get that same motion. But that's a lot more rare than having a good, decent sacral angle. And then if you put the blocks underneath the ASIS, it makes that sacral angle pop out even more. So I do want you to do that. Do extension, do flexion. Lateral flexion will do side lying and prone, and then rotation. If I'm pushing, this is L1, this is L2. What motion are we calling this? Right rotation of?
The
L1,
joint.
L2, the joint. But we name the joint by the top vertebra. So it would be right rotation of L1. And we know that means L1 and L2 together. It's not right rotation of L1 and left rotation of L2.
So you're pushing L1 this way and L2 that
The
way.
SP of L1 this way, the SP of L2 this way. How am I going to do left rotation?
Switch.
Here and here. I want you to remember that, because I've seen a lot of people do this. This becomes this like chaotic mess of nothingness, where you put. So you have no idea what you're testing at that point. You're just pushing stuff up and down and left and right and back and forth, and probably you're going to miss right rotation at L1 because all you did was left rotation. You're going to miss some stuff. So systematically, I put a thumb here on L1, thumb here on L2, push like this. Look at the motion. Notice how much I'm getting here. Not much. You can't really notice that much. I'm not doing like what we pretended to do in the thoracic spine. Oh, that's moving well. It's a horrible feeling. Yeah, you're laughing. So that's right rotation. I switch my thumbs. I do left rotation. This is really the nice thing about doing this, is I can compare those right away. That wiggles, good. Now I go down to L3, so now I'm on L2-3, so the L2 joint. That wiggles in left rotation, maybe a little bit stuck in right rotation. And then I move down to L3-4, do the same thing. Does that make sense to everybody? I want you to do it that way. Not necessarily L1 to L4, but do it either top to bottom or bottom to top, and make sure you do right and left rotation right after each other on the same joint. And you have to understand that top vertebra, bottom vertebra thing. So if this were L1 and this were L2, this is anterior, this is posterior, this is right, this is left. When L1 rotates like that on L2, we call that what? Right rotation. When L2 rotates like this on L1, what do we call that? We call that right rotation. Because that's the same thing as this. When L2 and L1 move together in opposite directions like that, it's still right rotation. So if we're thinking about this joint here, the space between these two vertebrae, all of those are the same motion to the joint. If we were then thinking about the joint below L2, then it's L2-3. You don't even think about L1. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's important. That's one of those things where I think some people have just assumed that you won't get it, so why talk about it? And it's like, you can't not get that to actually do this stuff. At a certain point, you're just making stuff up.
So when you were showing that,
Yeah.
it was just that the top one, L1, is able to rotate to the right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what- that's what we're focusing on.
That's what we're calling right rotation. So to the joint, and the joint is L1, L2, this is right rotation. Both vertebrae moving, but so is this,
Yep.
and so is this. To the joint, those are all the same motions, and we're going to name that right rotation because it's relative to what the top vertebrae of that motion segment is doing.
Thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's all we need to know. Next week, we're gonna actually utilize that to set the patient up specific ways. So let's palpate, let's do the lateral flexion, sideline, lateral flexion using the legs prone, and then prone extension, flexion of just L5S1, and then rotation.